Yeah. So Pampon, do feel free to launch images and so when you feel like it. And
Yeah.
if we then ask a video, they just see it again. It's no problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Just play around like you feel.
There's a there's about 1 minute of generic, Antje, just to say. So welcome everybody. Welcome to Reenacting Archives. It's a series of dialogues that continues, in fact, dialogues that we started already last year on ACTV. Yeah, I'm super happy to welcome for this first session of this year Antje van Wichelen. Hi, Antje. Nice to have you here. Or not here, actually, because as usual, we are quite far from each other. Me, I'm in Germany. Antje is in Brussels in her studio. And yeah, Antje, I guess mostly what will introduce you will be the talking about your practice and about the proposition that you do. And also, I don't want to frame it too strongly. This is something I will keep. I don't want to frame it too strongly within this notion of reenactment. This is a kind of background of the discussion, but it shouldn't sort of imprison us in one concept or in one idea. Of course, it's one of the reasons of the choice of you and others who will come to talk to. And yeah, Antje is working with film, with photographic archives, precisely anthropometric photographic archives. We will talk about this more later, but we decided to start first with a session of showing films. And as Antje works with analog film, this is a bit unusual. Normally we show full screen some files here. So in this case, it will be, as usual for your work, Antje, a kind of performative session to show the films in your studio, and we can take part in that. So thanks a lot for that. And I guess we give you, first of all, time for that, Antje.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me. And I work together for sound with Rokia Bamba, and I do the images. So I propose we first launch a sound work, a sound piece that she made for our most recent exhibition that was in Turin of the group Troubled Archives that we are part of. Yes, please launch it now.
C'est le souffle des ancêtres. Ceux qui sont morts ne sont jamais partis. Ils sont dans l'ombre qui s'éclaire et dans l'ombre qui s'épaissit. Les morts ne sont pas sous la terre. Ils sont dans l'arbre qui frémit. Ils sont dans le bois qui gémit.
Okay, thanks, Antje.
You're welcome.
That's good. It's funny. It's always super exciting, this act of showing analog film. I think it's really, it's always a strong tension of, where things work and the sound and the materiality. And it's funny because I only have a small image of the stream here, but I think that in fact the image is almost disappearing between the translation of the different media into the digital. So it's also important to say for the viewers that we will show some documentation of your exhibition, where you will also probably see more of the actual image that you would see in an exhibition. On the other hand, I think what is interesting, and that's why I think we could already, before showing that, start a little bit to talk about your process, because in a certain sense, I think that the disappearance of those images in this medial translation is rather significant for your work also. Maybe not to this extent, but in a certain sense, I think it's part of your practice. So I would just, in fact, ask you to describe us a little bit your process, and in particular, well, you correct me if I'm wrong, but what I see as the kind of base or fundament of your process, which is this interaction with the anthropometric photographic archives and the way of sort of reprocessing those images with all its complications, the violence that is attached to them, and so on. Maybe you can just explain this a little bit, and also for the people who listen, maybe what are these archives, what are these anthropometric photographs, because that's something that maybe not everybody knows directly.
Sure. Yeah, first I want to comment on what we just saw, because in fact, the distortion and the effect of not being able to read the image was just the inverse of what it was in the exhibition. Because at the first images, so you have a black image, then a very dark image, and then in our case, an overexposed image. So you had a black image, then a correct image, and then a seriously overexposed image. And in fact, in the exhibition in Turin, it was exactly the opposite, in the sense that it was people were completely in the dark, and then you had a little bit of image, then you had a correct image, and then it disappeared again into black. And so so now we had a correct image, then overexposed, and then correct again, and then into black. So it's funny. But if we would have tested, I would have put on some more lights before screening in the studio. But so that's no problem really. So I can maybe speak of these two images, because it's a bit strange that I start maybe with negative images and still images, but I was screening very close details of images that I found in a Turin archive in a negative, with a negative pellicule, with a negative film, to print them to leave a trace on big tissues of 4 meters by 3, because I had a big space and I could really do that. And so the tissues were impregnated with cyanotype product. So the visitors made the projectors run by entering, and also the sound. And then so they left an imprint on these shrouds. So it was a reference to the Turin shroud, which is a kind of a mythology also to have an imprint of Jesus. And now I turned images around that they have in their archives of the Missione della Consolata of priests who made anthropometric photos while being on a mission in Kenya. So these images were taken between 1900 and 1911. So I work a lot with very old photography of mostly of the 19th century, actually, and until 1920. So photography started around 1860, and it was really easy to use from 1880 on, more or less. And so one of the things people did with photography was going out, photographing to support the measurements they made of people, and mostly of people ready to be colonized. It was often just during or before colonization that they were trying to categorize people into tribes, races, and also they were also often scientists, anthropologists were taking the measurements of people, and also there was a hierarchy built into the people, which was mostly according to skin color.
And those photographs, they were thought like almost like proofs of this system of sort of generalization, racialization, in fact, no?
Yes.
Like this, to build these standards, and the photographs, of course, as in the time, I think even more than now, photograph was had this kind of proof status of a reality, no?
Yes,
to be found.
yes, and also to show it, like the first large series of this kind of photography were made during the human zoos in Europe. So while people were being exhibited, they were also brought to the studio to be photographed. And also,
and now when we say you are taking these photographs and you are, let's say, reprocessing it, we can still, you describe one example. I think it would be nice if you would also describe the one of the pixelization of the stop motion almost practice with them. But before, maybe like a sort of evil question saying like, but you know, if we talk about reenacting those archives, I mean, it's interesting because when you take the Torino imprint on it's about the kind of autopoiesis image. No, it's an image that sort of imprints itself onto again and again something. So we can say that's maybe part of the big problem with the colonial visual traces, in fact, films and photographs of the time, that they keep sort of transmitting this violence also. Yes. In a sense. No, I mean, this is something we evidently we face when we show them, when we discuss them, and so on. So an evil question could be about why to reprocess those images, because you know they could also, we could say, okay, let's enclose them in these archives, and it's good that to consider in this case the archive as a kind of closed body of something that is, you know, far away from being seen. So you do kind of the opposite, huh?
Yes.
Are you doing the opposite? That's maybe a question, eh? Like taking them out basically and reinitiating a sort of process on them. Yes. With them.
Yeah. Yes. So for me, that's been it's been a hard choice that keeps on being questioned by myself as well. But I'm really convinced that everything which has to do with this violence and this colonialism and everything that happened and that is still happening today, and that's where the sense of the work is that we have to face it. And I'm not saying that everybody has to face these very violent pictures, especially as they are. People can really choose. And more I invite people in a way, saying that like you don't have to go in and look at these images. You can stay outside, and then I show what I show is already a selection of what I can face. And then this is me, like a white body, but then people who have been suffering from racism all their life, I completely agree if they say I don't need to face these images again. But for me, it's kind of it was kind of when I first saw the images that I work with, I was very shocked, because somewhere I hadn't seen them, but somewhere they were already imprinted in my kind of cultural DNA. Like it's like the archive with the big A, and it's such an unfair and dishonest archive that I kind of wanted to cure myself and the people around me from this like kind of disease, like an abscess. It's very ugly, and I wanted to cut it open and to really face it, really look it in the all this ugliness in the face, to be able to get rid of it and to cure, because the whole racism history of our society is one big omission and lie, and we seem to never be speaking honestly about it, like to start with saying it is true and it's really bad. And so for me, to discover these images were like touching some kind of truth of, look here, this is where this cliche racist image that is repeated over and over again, this is where it began. This is where it began to sit in an image and to be imprinted.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting what you say. I think it resonates for me with my own experience somehow, researching a bit, at least not as much and as intense as you, but a bit on this colonial film archives in Belgium, and well, as we did together on the sort of colonial private films. Yeah. I think that's something for me that it's something questionable in a sense, as you say, but it's true that there can be a position to say we cannot not deal with those images, precisely for the reason that you tell, that in fact they are already inscribed in our sort of way to process the world, in the kind of, in the imprint, in the a structure in which we are seeing and categorizing and so on. And in that sense, of course, we can say, this is a violence that is not attached necessarily just to the photographs as material traces of this act of producing these representations, but actually they are already sort of virtually transmitted and literally physically transmitted into this society. And in that logic, of course, we can say the photographic traces, they are at least the materialization of something like that from the time when this initiation was, brought strongly further at the time. So it means that maybe they give a chance to take something into your hand, in a sense, that you have to deal with in a certain sense because it's already there. So which would mean that I think it's an interesting discussion, because if we talk about this reenacting archives, it's something that is really, you can ask why. In a sense, the archive is not only the archive, it's not just the building where this material is inside, but that's already something that is very interrelated to a reality outside of these photo collections, in fact. And in this sense, I find very interesting these other series that I met you with. Basically, like the first things that I saw from you, it was this sort of stop motion or pixelization of those photos, where I think you, in my view, I can just briefly describe and then you can give a resonance. But for me, the thing that I found very interesting there is that, of course, this is a technique that is extremely simple in a sense, not necessarily the entire process, but the main sort of gesture to say you take these photographs and you reorder them according to certain sort of focus points, let's say, that allow for a certain continuity within the difference of those photos. And then you put them in a very sort of short frequency behind each other, which is the principle of stop motion and of pixelization, in fact. And what we face there, I think, is extremely interesting in effect out of this rather simple thing to do, is that what was intended to prove the base of the generalization of those photos, which says those people are all the same, basically, we can categorize them. We can say they're all like, this is. Suddenly, because of this simple trick, so to speak, which is really a trick, you start to see only the difference. That's really amazing, because you see the focal point of the eyes that look at you, for example, and suddenly these people look back. You have a play with the eyes, and everything that is around that is completely different from each photo to the next. So what it just does is it does a kind of animation of difference of these photographs that are intended to prove exactly the opposite, basically. And this is something this was my first impression, when I saw these films. It was like, wow, okay, it's very, and then of course you have all your process. Maybe it's interesting to describe that also, because that's very, like with the work that you described, there's always this kind of process of putting these kind of tricks, then sort of processing it into another media, then sort of also putting your hand on it in a certain sense, like having this very complicated relation to your own body also and to your own gesture. So maybe you can, I don't know whether you can give a resonance on this description or so, because I feel it's something that I see very much at the base of your strategy, so to speak.
Yeah, thank you very much for this description. I hope it's been well recorded. I will listen to it again. It's really nice. Yes, it's true that I really focused on the looks in people's eyes, the people that were photographed 150 years ago, but that were the looks, like it was like they had the only defense they had according to this situation in which they were, was the look with which they looked into the camera. And because often it came with the army. They were photographed at gunpoint. They were photographed in very forceful situations, and so the only thing they could do was to express themselves through the look in their eyes. And it's very, very touching to see how many people looked in a super angry way and in a very emotional and very communicative, because when you look at a photo like that, it really communicates. You look at a person who really looks in a very intense way at the camera. And so I placed one look after another, and indeed in strategies with curves of intensity and in the intention I read in it, because of course it's my interpretation. And so you have evolutions in the strength of the look, and everything changes. And sometimes, and I really was speeding up a lot of this animation, as you say, and not only to show the difference and the amount of photos, very similar photos from all colonized continents, but also to avoid and to confront with the gaze we grow up with. Like, to look at a photo is to be already judgmental, already like, okay, this person is very beautiful and very exotic and very, and I wanted to prevent that way of looking. So I was finding ways, strategies, as you say, to really distort these ways of looking.
And animating the look back, of course, it's also something that I mean, the look back in itself, I think it has something like it's a form of resistance. In fact, if you consider the system, how it was put in place, which was so much based on the fact that, I mean, that was one of the strongest bases, I feel. If you look at the for example, the colonial films, this idea that there's clearly one direction of looking. There's just one looking at the other, and the other is never looking back, actually. I mean, it's like, of course, people look back, but the entire construction of the system, so to speak, the architecture of the image, the architecture of the scene, it's constructed in order to prevent the other one looking back, because it seems to be like one of the central sort of power institutions, in fact, if you want. So, to say, no, it's me looking at you, you are not looking back at me. Right? And so, in fact, it's interesting also as a kind of, if we think like that, this is a way to sort of animate or reanimate those looks, in fact, into a timeline, into something that necessarily creates a kind of cinematic or similar to cinematic situation, that also, in fact, this look back is sort of reinitiated, or like something that is reactivated in a sense. And, yeah, it's interesting because in the single photo, as you easily sort of frame something in front of us, it's much more easy to step into this classical safe distance and to sort of project again the same sort of stereotypes that we are used to see without letting people look back. Actually, it's very hard to do that with the films. Also because, again, there is this kind of, and this is maybe something that is interesting also in the methodology of when we talk about reenacting those archives. It feels like that a certain notion of blurriness or of almost disappearance, but not entire disappearance of the image in its mediality and in its various sort of medial translations, including your body, as a way, as a tool to interact with them. That this is it seems like a central tool to me also, and it seems to connect a bit with this thing that always, when we almost don't see anything, we start to see ghosts. We start to see something that is that happens in our heads rather than materially on a screen.
Yes, I was using that a lot. In fact, the materiality of the film then on the 16mm film strips, but I was using a lot of overexposure. At the very start of my research on how to deal with the images, I was going for big contrasts, very black and white images, like almost how do you say, iconic, like you have this image of Che Guevara, completely black and white. But I found it didn't work. It didn't bring the nuance that I was looking for, and so I went more and more into the grays and very light grays and overexposure. And I learned also, speaking with people, for example, Etienne Kerr from MTK in Grenoble, he taught me that in fact when you have very light images, very gray, many grays in the images and not just black and white, that your eye needs to look for information. And so you start searching in the images for information because it's almost all a whole white screen, and not only the eye but the brain becomes very active. And it gives an opening to thinking. It enhances thinking, and so I use that a lot to have people like searching for information in on the screen, and then maybe giving up or starting to think about their relationships to these photographs and about everything. About they told me they were just thinking so much during the screenings, and that's and that was a good thing. That was really what I was looking for.
Yeah, also because this has a turn on one side. It's like this is a general thing of animation. I would say that it often plays with this idea of that, of course, with the a certain reduction or lack or taking away rather of information continuity, consistency. What happens is a stronger activation of the spectator as a collaborator on the image. But this, of course, it also has a turn, and I think this is again interesting with these particular images and in relation to the violence they produce, that of course to be a collaborator on these kind of images, it also means a different kind of responsibility that you need to take for what you see, actually, not what the image shows you, but actually what you see. And I think this is something that is quite interesting, with, in correlation with what you say, this idea that, of course, your eye looks for something, but that means also your brain is stronger required to co-construct. And what you see at the end is, to a large degree, it's also the product, or it's a collaboration of the image and the one who has put them together, evidently, and produced them, and yourself as a spectator. And I think that's also interesting because, of course, it's one thing to talk or to deal with a crime that has been committed basically a long time ago, which is a past crime, which is archived, which is like put into files basically, or the crime that is actually happening in the very moment when I look at these images, sort of. I think that's for me it's very interesting in terms of intention, or again of sort of politics, or of what does it mean to play with, to work with these things that we could also, that I think most of us have the intention, if we see them, we would rather leave them beside. We don't want to see, it's like, okay, let's leave them out of the frame. But then it's not, in a sense, I feel these films, they are not working maybe only and not even primarily on what these images have been, but what they are in the very particular moment of the screening, actually, of the viewing. Maybe it's nice to if you agree, to show just the little documentation of the, I don't know, you can choose, in fact, which you would like to show. Maybe it's better if you take the choice.
I think maybe we should go to the exhibition in Cologne.
Cool.
Yeah.
Could we do that?
A clip, yeah.
Super.
Welcome to the recognition machine. Please sit still. We are trying to take your picture. We are now, based on the model FIR 2013, looking for your match in the database of old colonial images. The artist reframed, rephotographed and hand-processed each of these images. You have been categorized.
Right, thank you. I don't know. I mean, maybe do you want to give a little context of the Cologne exhibition, like, because also you worked with the museum itself, no?
Yes. Yes, so you introduced me to the photography curator, Lucia Halde, and she saw an opportunity to have an artist in residence. And so she invited me. The framework was the Fotoszene Köln, that a photography festival that had 5 museums work with artists in a program they called Artist Meets Archive. And so they had different artists in different archives, and I could work with the archive of the Rautenstrauch-Just Museum, Kulturen der Welt, which is, in fact, it's the old colonial museum of Cologne. It's like their it didn't start with a king, but with a few collectors from Cologne who wanted to give their collections to the people of Cologne, and so to a museum. So the museum was founded also in the 19th century, and so they have a large photography collection with which I also worked, and I integrated many photos in the films that were screened, like with the 5 projectors. I went there several times. I did a workshop also with people from Cologne, from different immigration descents, to look at the images that were present in the fixed exhibition. So in the permanent exhibition, because there's also photography lying near objects. So there's a photo of a man with a necklace, for example, and the necklace is laying there, like as if it was ripped off his neck. So yeah, it's so there's a strange relation with photography also, and they are aware of this, and I don't know if they changed it, but it was in the plans to look at that in a more profound way. So
yeah, that would make sense, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think that in fact, up to that point of this exhibition, in a certain sense, for me, I know we had some discussions about that. Also, for me, you were an artist who has a very strong sort of practice with those images, with interacting with the different collections and stuff, and also, doing sort of performative screenings of these sessions, always connected with discussions. I think that's something that is also very, very important to mention, and we didn't speak about that at all. Mm-hmm. We should also speak about collectivity at the end somehow. I think that's also important anyway. But for the moment, just as one step before, you had this very strong practice. In a sense, it was interesting for me in the exhibition in Cologne. In a certain sense, it was, I don't know whether it was the first time, but for me at least, it was the first time that I saw your work sort of shown or laid out in a bit of a wider frame, in a sense of showing different works at the same time. And also you developed one piece for the show, no? The recognition machine. It was developed originally for Cologne, no? And then it was taken to other places as well. So maybe we could take a step towards this piece, if you agree, and you can describe a little bit what it is and how you collaborated on that and so on.
Yes. Yeah. So the recognition machine is based on an idea that came when I was working with the photos in Cologne, and that was like, the question was, what is the most important thing here? What needs to be done? And for me, the connection of us with the people in the photographs, in the old photographs, was very important. And so I wanted to realize that in a rather direct way. So I stepped towards Michael Murto, who is a programmer, who is also well known at ELK, because he sometimes gives workshops and teaches. And I went to him with this very simple story, like, would you please help me to realize a photo machine that gives you the wrong picture? So that turns out you go into the machine, into the photomaton, and you receive another picture of somebody who might look like you or not at all. And so we started discussing, and it became much more layered and complex. And we were looking also for the link between systems of control today, through image and through facial recognition, and the controlling photography of the colonial times. And so it became very interesting discussions with Michael, and also about how these facial recognition softwares function. And so it became a very layered work in which people are confronted with how a very basic facial recognition motor is in fact trained with random images from Google. 27,000 images from Google have been selected by people to recognize emotion in faces. And so it recognizes emotion in the face of the visitor who comes into the recognition machine, and then and also it looks for the same emotion in the database that we have been feeding the machine. And so it connects you with your emotional brother or sister through a model that pretends to recognize emotion. So maybe, and we made afterwards, we made a telephone version of it, a smartphone version for Turin. So, in fact, anybody can go to the website of the recognition machine now and see who you get connected to. So maybe you can do that.
Yeah, we should advertise that. Actually, is it possible to put the link? I don't know. Maybe while we talk, you could put it in the chat, and we could sort of.
Yes.
Pampon could just put it on the screen or something for people to.
Yeah.
Because I think it's interesting to make that public, so people can actually practice that.
Yeah.
I mean,
there's a comment part where you can look up the photo that you received. You can go into the database where it comes from if it's online. Otherwise, you have to contact Lucia Halder, for example, the curator from Cologne. And then, but then our question is also to write a comment about what you lived while doing that, or somebody wrote a poem. Some people answered with an image they uploaded. So.
Yeah, I would love to discuss this further. Of course, it's just that I know that there's the time you need to get from your studio to your home also, and so in fact there's a few points that I would really still like to discuss.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, it connects with what you said. Also, it connects with the recognition machine and the strategy that you choose, which I find very interesting. And this idea of for me, it's also retranslating this sort of what we talk about, this active role that a person takes from a hic and nunc, from a here and now state of things, into this system of, transmitting those images and their structural base, in fact, into an actual software tool, in a sense, which is already happening, as you say, right? I think in terms of AI use, for example, for facial recognition, this is something that there's a lot of publication also about this racialization that happens there, and in fact the racial categories that appear suddenly there, because of course the training of the machine at a certain level, it goes by human, and by it re-imprints what we already have as this kind of structural feature in our head. So in fact, it's something that repeats and repeats. And in a certain sense, it's interesting because with this very sort of simple idea of the photomaton, the recognition machine, it builds a kind of crystallization of this process or something. It's very interesting. But what I wanted to come to now is this fact of the resonance, of the feedback, of the comment, of the discussion also, which I think is, I mean, we work together within, we also have to say we have one project, we work together on a kind of archive of private colonial films with other filmmakers and researchers. And in fact, it's impossible. Of course, we have an hour now, so it's absolutely impossible to even hint to a few points of the huge problematics that are there as soon as you kind of touch these kind of images. But of course, one of the aspects that is always relevant is always who talks. Who talks, like from which kind of agency do you talk? Of course, this question of a kind of course you have a certain you think you take a certain responsibility, but within the very gesture of taking this responsibility, you are also reducing again a context to a very particular problematic and to a very particular also historical moment that is not at all sort of covering, of course, even a larger part of the history and of the complexity of what those films are talking about, actually. But I think one of the super relevant and super important points, in my view, that always appeared in these discussions were like the question of the multi-direction, the multi voices, in fact, like the multiplication of voices, and the fact of how to open this up potentially endless. On the other hand, with all the problematics of what do you accept also within that. So that's the second question that comes to it. How do you deal with the fact if on this website, for example, you get comments that in a very problematic way sort of keep transmitting political ideas or political structures that you don't want to support actually with your project? It's kind of two questions in one, but I think maybe you can just talk a little bit about this entire body of question, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Until now, it hasn't happened that people came to voice opinions that are for me obsolete, or that that I don't agree with. Luckily, because in many other manifestations, there are people coming exactly to destroy it. So in Brussels, there's a kind of a group who does that, but they didn't find me. But in fact, for me, the opening up to multiple voices has been very, very important. I wouldn't also feel legitimate to speak and to do this work without checking it all the time, or without going back and forth between different voices with people of different backgrounds. So from the very first moment I started to consider working with these images, I already spoke with people like Bambi Kuppers and Pascal Obolo to ask, what do you think of this, and is it even possible? And then, of course, I had to decide in the end, but for me, it was very important to go back and forth. And Rokia Bamba has also done a long road with me from the very beginning. And yeah, she was really not well when I showed her the photos I had found at the very beginning. But for me, the feedback of people, first of all, who were close to me, and then opening up more and more, was very important. For me, the discussion, the first thing I did with the films I was making from the anthropometric photography were debates where like 30 people were present, and I did a series of 5 debates in which I showed some film. After a while, Rokia also was ready to let us hear some sound, and so we did that apart. So the sound took a very, very big place also, because it was a dialogue between her and me on the topic through art. And so sometimes we just showed like 10 minutes of work, 15 minutes. It was growing between the sessions. There was more material to show and to discuss. And Peggy Pierrot was moderating, who is also very well known at ERG. And so people could inscribe up until 30 people. And also I really strongly invited people, activists, from different backgrounds and different cultural backgrounds, just to have a very mixed public, so that we wouldn't have like this one opinion, like the people I come from, like more leftist white artists. I wouldn't have been comfortable if we would have remained within that circle to discuss everything that was to be discussed. So for me, this series of debates was very much nourishing also my work, and how I would advance with it, how I could speak about it, how I could write about it, and show the work in different contexts.
And how do you see these sessions in relation to the more, like, let's say, exhibition-like works? Because this is something I'm really curious about also. Like when I see this, because I didn't attend a lot of the sessions, but I think I saw 2. And in fact, of course, there is a kind of, I don't know, is a kind of contested situation of the structure. In a certain sense, these what you could consider artworks or pieces or traces of processes, however you say, they are, first of all, they are kind of, in this context, and in my view, they are kind of trigger of discussion. So they are kind of trigger of a situation that is primarily a situation of exchange, which is something maybe in a kind of ideal world we could also say about an exhibition, but we know that there's a lot of other sort of things that happen there, like in the sense of the framing of the museum, in the sense of the maybe the non-communication, or it's, per se. And I know that you initiated some format within that, but I would be curious, just personally, like how you see this relation of this this kind of process on one side, on the other side the thing that you build, and that even if you initiate other formats around or with it, it stays in a certain way also as a static construction.
Yes, it's I try to indeed to envelope the work in a way that people are like that there's a kind of a framework that is very much decided by me and the other people in Troubled Archives, the collective, especially also with the sound. The sound is a very good way to build a frame, an emotional frame around something on view. But I do admit that it's, for me, it's a bit creepy to not be there all the time and have the reactions of people and not control what is happening or how it's happening, and not to have feedback. It's strange.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, it's just it's in a certain sense, of course, this is a particular case because of the kind of material you work with, and also the strategy that you use, of course. But it's a thing that is generally a huge question, I think. You know, when you have something that comes out of a practice of research and that is sort of framed into a situation, let's say, that becomes of course an exhibition or a performance or something, a piece. In fact, yeah, it's always something that it does to the thing also, that, you know, it sort of encloses it in a certain sense, which of course we always intend and we work on reopening it, but it's something anyway. There's also no answer to it. It's more my own reflection also that I kind of project here. But it's maybe as a very last question, then you can run to get home in time.
Hey, it's okay. I'm cool.
Yeah, it's okay. It's the question of the collective that I'm interested in, like this idea of which is more than what we discussed before, when you say there's feedback and there's a questioning of your position and there's a kind of, but of course at the end there's your practice, there's your hand on the material in a certain sense. So there's a lot of you in this process, in fact, also in decisive parts of this process. Mm-hmm. And I wonder how you see this question of the collective, also because you are in two collectives, actually. Like, and of course, I know that you do a lot with Troubled Archives, so there is a different kind of sort of general activity of this. We know that with Grey Zone Zebra also it was not always easy to collaborate, which is the other collective that's more like working on this archive of films. But it's something that interests me also in this context. You know, is in your view the collective, is it also a form of response to this unidirectional way to work, or to this political or ethical problem that with this material might be attached to it, in fact? Mm-hmm. You know.
Yes, absolutely. Some people were feeding the work so much, so for me it's not the artistic work is not something of ego and of I'm so important and so genius. And so for me, the going back and forth all the time with other people and the collaborations are so rich that that when we kind of grew into a situation where the people I worked with were not correctly mentioned. And that was very, very frustrating for me, because I had asked and it hadn't happened, and so it was like, so yeah, for me thinking it out together, working together, it was so much more than just me being supported by other people or who were not correctly paid. So somewhere it's like really the ecology of my artistic existence is really being with other people who go into this stream together with you and who make things happen and who think it through together with you, and without them it would never be the same. So it and then having this frustration of not seeing them mentioned in the way they should was a good reason to start to call it a collective, to give it a name of a collective, even if it started from my work and the things I had started before we were working together, in fact. So yeah, that's the logic of it. So so without being a restrained thing, it became a collective.
Yeah, it's organic way then to grow. Now I think it's super for me. Well, thank you for the moment. Of course, I hope that some people will be even interested further into the material. I guess you can write to me, to Pampon. We can sort of forward your mails to Antje, and we can find a way how to share maybe more material, or find a way to have more interaction on that. For me, yeah, it's a very beautiful work, of course. Beautiful, okay, it's a very problematic work, evidently also, but it's a very it asks very strong question, and of course it's also a kind of case, I think, where this question of what does it mean to reenact, a past, or what is the sort of present tense in this past also. It's so crucial and so at the base of this practice, in fact, of the question, of its political question, of its ethical question, that it's a very I think it's a very, very relevant format and work to observe in this sense. So thank you very much, Antje, for joining me and us here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
And yes, we will see each other very soon, I guess. For the rest, if there are any questions, as usual, or remarks or whatever, we are happy to receive them, of course. And we will follow up with the next session next week somehow. I cannot tell exactly when yet, and things are a little bit in process because we just restart the entire format. So there's a lot of people I want to talk to. Some have already agreed, and we will see how to schedule things, but we let you know. And well, thanks for joining anyway, whoever joined, and thanks a lot to Pampon and his super crew in his studio to work this out with us. And thanks to Antje once more. See you soon, I hope.
Okay. I took all these pictures out of their normal categories because they were meant to categorize people and try to define tribes, and all these things went wrong, all these projects around this photography, of course. But so I took them out and I put them again in categories, or in what I call chapters, that have their title and that are reflecting what I saw in the photos.
Welcome everybody. My name is Jane Amega. This is a hairdressing salon originally. I've been in Excel for like 15 years. Since last year, I got into organizing workshops with a bit of the support of the Excel. My topic is mixed cultures, mixed races, raising mixed children.
Wat ik vooral fascinerend vind is dat het zo herhalend is en heel vaag en zo. Ik verwacht steeds allemaal, je zegt duizenden foto's, dus ik verwacht. En dat is helemaal niet zo. Dus daar ben ik heel benieuwd naar waarom je die keuze maakt. En ik vind de tekst, de tekst en de cijfers heel dominant. Het neemt heel veel aandacht weg voor mijn gevoel. Maar misschien doe je dat ook expres. Of kom je dat juist heel erg tegen als je dat onderzoek doet?
It kind of angered me seeing and hearing those images and the soundscape. Just because of the topic.
Enfin, j'aime beaucoup le chuchotement en fait et comment les mots viennent au fur et à mesure pour te scander, mais aussi petit à petit on rentre dans une autre dimension. Enfin, on sent qu'il y a une petite progression quand même.
Et quelque chose qui m'a frappé là, c'est aussi cette question de la disparition dans le travail de l'image. J'ai l'impression à un moment donné d'avoir affaire à des fantômes comme ça. Et ça m'a beaucoup touché dans cette vision-là. Et puis il y a toute la partie, la dernière partie, exotisme in the studio, ou at the studio. C'est toujours frappant pour moi quand il y a cette accumulation d'images similaires. Je trouve toujours ça très très violent et je me dis, et ce qui me frappe vraiment, c'est de voir des gens du monde entier qui ont été pris dans les mêmes positions, et là des femmes et des enfants à moitié dénudés avec ces vases, et cette accumulation là, c'est toujours frappant. L'autre chose aussi que j'ai trouvé intéressant dans cette série aujourd'hui, c'est aussi toujours en lien avec cette question de la disparition, c'est les bordures, le fait qu'on voit des parties des corps. Et pour moi, ça renvoie vraiment à cette idée de catalogue qui était derrière ces projets photographiques. Voilà, juste en réaction première, comme ça, de ma part.
Yes, I already knew Antje's work, and it's also somehow connected to things I am working around. She showed me one other projection before. As like this one, I like it that she gives us the images very fast. Like you have numbers of people that don't count for the viewer, you could say. It goes fast. With the previous connection, I had the feeling they all looked back at you, they stared back at you, and I somehow thought it was a good idea to also show only body parts, like even more, yes, people as things, only parts of them are shown.
I like very much that you try out now the titles, and I think that's good to see in a setting like this, like what the reactions are. And I do think I like the chapters where the pictures are not so direct, and where you see more that you processed the images. Yeah, so that's my opinion.
When I'm Austrian, so I grew up also with the sort of thinking about the Holocaust and the Nazi time, and so black and white images with numbers often recall for me concentration camp. So the other side of dehumanization, as was mentioned before. And on the other hand, as you perhaps know, the Austrian government has just been recreated with the participation of the extreme right. So what I ask myself is also, what is the confrontation of such looks at the past with today? And there I've just recently read an article about the typology of photographs of refugees in the so-called refugee crisis, so that it's always the same type of pictures that depicts people and basically presents an idea of what they are, who or what they are and what they are not are.
J'en étais arrivé à me dire qu'au fond, l'accès à la connaissance est lié aussi à une relation à 3 ou 4, c'est-à-dire que 3 ou 4 instances, c'est-à-dire les personnes qui reçoivent l'information, par exemple la colonisation, la décolonisation, que sais-je encore, et aussi bien sûr au départ les chercheurs qui puisent l'information à la source et qui permettent de dégager, de comprendre ce qui se passe. Et puis, bien sûr, entre les chercheurs et la population, il y aurait les artistes et les animateurs. Et je me demandais quelle idée vous avez de ce schéma que je propose là.
Eh ben ça, je ne sais pas. J'essaie, mais j'essaie de toute façon parce que c'est... Oui, ça peut être utile, mais j'essaie de former mon travail dans mon authenticité, sans penser à quelle utilisation parce que je pense que ce qui serait pas très bien pour le travail, c'est le compromis. Si j'allais chercher des façons de tenir des goals, des buts éducatifs. Mais si ça peut servir, ce que je fais comme je le fais, si ça peut servir à des buts éducatifs, tant mieux.